Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today with my review for Greedfall. As a lot of you know, I posted my 10+ hour impressions of the game, and now after about 45 hours, I'm ready for the full review. To review Greedfall, I think we need to properly understand where this game lies in the industry. This is a AA game. That doesn't mean it's immune to criticism, but rather that there are certain expectations that can become so lofty for the game's budget that you have to start wondering if the problem is the reviewer or the game itself. You can already cop this game for $40 off Amazon, but the game launched at the $50 price point, which is the standpoint I will be critiquing it from. So let's get it started with the story, which revolves around Desarde, legate of the Merchants Congregation, as the game so frequently reminds you. You are heading to Tier 4D, an island of opportunity, in search of a cure for the Malachor, a disease that plagues the continent you hail from. The island is in contention between multiple factions, each with their own agenda, those being the natives of the island itself, the Bridge Alliance, who believes in science above all else, Teleme, who are so faith-driven that they're borderline mad, the Coin Guard, who serve as mercenaries and security for the island, the Naughts, who handle travel of the sea, and lastly is the faction you hail from, the Merchants Congregation, which is the one that you determine the fate of. And that doesn't even account for what I'd consider are sub-factions, such as multiple cuts of the natives, some wanting to ally with the new people arriving at the island, some who want to fight back, some who are a little more barbaric. Each of the factions play a big part in the overarching story, and as you make decisions along the way, you'll see your reputation put you in better or worse standing. Sometimes quests will take you along for a ride, as I like to call it, not allowing for much dialogue choice at all, but rather just telling you a story. Other times it's all about impactful choice and the consequence that you'll see later on. Accepting this give and take method, we'll call it, of storytelling was tough, but ultimately I feel it was for the better of the game, because all it wants to do is put you in a position to eventually make a choice. Even if it's just one conversation option at the end of a side quest, they want to put you in that spot. Greedfall's factions really don't try to hide their motives for certain actions, whether they're for the good of the island or not, and while that straightforward approach may be to the distaste of some, I believe when the ending hangs in the balance of my reputations, I absolutely do not want to be guessing on what opposing factions are really thinking. Now that's not to say that they'll come out and be like, well, yep, I did this because it's bad. No, it's more so that it's very obvious when they're doing something bad or something good, even if their own motivations are a little bit warped. Greedfall's choice and consequence, however, comes in a different manner than I think most of us were imagining during the game's marketing and hype cycle. While there are a few main story beats along the way that are diverging paths and a lot more than I expected, especially when you look at some of the hidden trophies or achievements, there is a lot of different ways the story could go, and the same goes for some side quest lines. It's really just about managing your reputation. You may lose reputation with a faction and feel like nothing happened when a quest concludes, like you had no impact on the world, but come the end, when those relations are really put to the test, and you'll really feel the weight of all the decisions that you made in your 40-ish hour adventure. That is not to say that while you're playing it you won't have those moments, but definitely the most heavy whoa moment is when the ending was starting to approach. The dialogue isn't as expansive as most RPGs, a lot of the times presenting one option to selecting conversation. In fact, I believe that they would have just gone with straight conversation back and forth, but they remembered it was an RPG and they had to put something there, so sometimes they would let you just take the control back and make a decision. Really, the only time dialogue selection comes up is the rare times you can question people or when making a big choice for a quest. There aren't skill checks almost ever outside of your intuition, using a companion who is with you at the moment to speak for you and maybe persuade a faction that they're familiar with, or your charisma. Sometimes you can inspect, for example, a dead body using your science skill, but really infrequent. I think throughout my 45 hours this happened twice, 3 times, really infrequent, and I found that quite disappointing, because they could have had the same dialogue options available but just changed some of the prerequisites to make it accessible, and they could have even taken a New Vegas route and grayed out those options so you knew what you were missing, and the game sort of subliminally told you that, hey, if you built differently, this is an option that would have been available. I think this is where they're learning. This is a company that's growing clearly, and I hope they take a lesson from that, because the dialogue system definitely isn't as good as other RPGs despite its budget. Now let's talk about companions a little bit. Companions in Greedfall are a strange bunch to critique. As characters, they're alright, I enjoyed them quite a bit. It's not that they're poorly written or not interesting, in fact I find them fascinating at times, considering each one of them represents the number of factions I listed earlier, but it's that most companion quests serve to rather flesh out the world and your character more than develop that person that you're questing with. Everything in Greedfall, everything serves to build that world, and it's to a strength but also to a deficit. The quests are excellent regardless, but it's just something to be aware of, that you will have those deep, intimate moments with your companions, but at the same time, everything does serve to either build your character or build the world around you, making it more engrossing, but at the same time, it could leave you feeling a little bit uneasy when the actual companion storyline wraps up. Some that are notable are Petrus and Ciora. I thought those were a little more close to the heart. I thought they were interesting, and they still did manage to build your character a little bit. But anyway, let's move on over to the gameplay. Greedfall's gameplay is the best system developer Spiders has ever crafted, which I personally don't think is saying all that much, because historically they've been known to have very spongy, awkward, unbalanced combat. But overall, what's important to note here is this is very serviceable combat. It works, and it works well. I personally built a battle mage, so all my magic skills were fully upgraded, and my one-handed mace was my secondary weapon to use when I was out of mana or to chip away against enemies with armor. Some enemies are weak against magic, while some are actually impervious to it, so I had to switch back and forth, and the game really does encourage, through its combat system, a hybrid build. You're probably not going to be focusing on just one tree. Keep that in mind if you're looking for specialist runs. You can be very good at something, but just know that you're going to be trying to balance it with something else for the sake of the combat. It's fairly simple. As you land melee attacks on your enemies, you'll whittle away their armor, which is those blue little shields above their head. Once the armor breaks, you can stun your enemy and do incredibly massive damage. Upon landing consecutive attacks, you'll build up your fury meter, which you can then use to deliver an unmissable attack, which does even more damage and usually cuts through armor or just disintegrates what's remaining of their armor. Tactical pausing is also an option, a la Dragon Age Inquisition, where you can freeze up the game and sift through your skills, potions, abilities, and so on to take your time when combat overwhelms you. Furthermore, there is dodging, blocking, so there's a lot of systems here. I don't think it reinvents the wheel. Like I mentioned just a second ago, it takes a lot of inspiration from Dragon Age Inquisition, and I think in the right ways, and that's coming from someone who really doesn't like DAI, but I really like the combat in this game. However, that was at first. It worked well, it had some tension during boss fights, and it held my attention. As I reached the late game though, maybe magic builds are OP, but combat, I'm gonna keep it honest guys, became boring. I shredded everything in my path, that's including the final boss, and it wasn't even the satisfying kind of power fantasy where you're just destroying everything in your path, but there's a little bit of engagement in your head. Everything dropped in a few hits, and combat lasted no longer than 30 seconds for a good chunk of the end of the game. Like I said, this may be my build, but it definitely impacted the end of my experience. Fret not, however, there are many ways to build your character, which is a strength of the game, whether you want to use huge two-handed weapons, guns and traps, blades, and so on. Furthermore, there are attributes which shape your character even more, such as endurance, allowing heavier armor to be equipped, or strength, letting you use bigger weapons. After that is talents, which impact questing and, more importantly, exploring the world. At first, I thought the talent tree was brilliant, forcing you to really weigh things out, picking carefully between the benefits of something like lockpicking and alchemy, because alchemy can allow you to create potions that are very helpful in combat. However, on the other end of the spectrum, it lets you blow up weak walls at certain levels depending on the tier of your talent. Meanwhile, lockpicking is helpful for acquiring higher level loot earlier on in the game. Yet, as the game goes on and I acquired items that would buff my talents, for example getting +1 craftsmanship or +1 to science, I was pretty much able to access almost anything outside of vigor. What would happen is I'd put maybe 1 talent point inside science, and I'd wear a chest piece that had a science buff, and then I'd have a pair of gloves that had a science buff. So anytime I needed 3 science, which is the max you could get, I would just switch out my equipment. And this sort of brings in an element of what I'd say is Divinity Original Sin, in, which I really liked, where some items in that game would have you buff your points and you could accomplish certain tasks that you originally were not able to. But at the same time, since there's such a limited amount of talents in this game and it's so easy to buff your character because maybe there's a lack of balance there, I was a little disappointed because eventually I could do pretty much everything I wanted to. Now, while the game can be a looker at times, there is a noticeable amount of jank, as I'm sure most people have picked up on, in the terms of textures loading in, object pop in, and some shoddy facial animations. But I played on the PS4, the base PS4 at that, no crashes, a couple of frame dips. Sometimes when I'd be talking to another character and there would be a fire behind me, for some reason the game would get really choppy, but when it came to combat, exploration, and pretty much any other conversation, the game ran perfectly fine, never dipped at all. Also, NPCs are almost never doing anything in the world space, and I almost regret noticing this because it really does kill a lot of the atmosphere in this world space. It feels like everyone's just placed down in their spot and stays there 24/7. So when you're exploring, it feels like everything's precisely placed rather than an organic living world. I'm not asking for everybody to have their own life cycle, their own daily routine, but no one's even doing anything in the village, for example. When you go to the natives, you think you'd see them working on cleaning clothes or crafting something along those lines, but everyone's just standing there. It's like, why? Do something, please. As for the sound, there's not much to go on here. Sound is all right in Greedfall. There are some tracks that are relatively excellent and stand tall during significant moments, or even the quiet ones when just exploring. Voice, on the other hand, is awesome, boasting a wide variety of voice actors. You guys know I'm big on this, searching for new talent, giving new talent opportunities, each representing the various factions with their own distinct dialect and tone. This is something that's a strength of the game. For example, the natives have their own language, and it reminds me a little bit of KOTOR, where you can sort of try to interpret what they're saying based off context clues, something, once again, I was a huge fan of. But anyway, the standout voices to me were Desarde himself, your main character, a golden, flexible voice that I really enjoyed the whole way through. It didn't feel intrusive, and I know some people are a little iffy on not just having a silent protagonist and in fact having your main character voiced, because it does limit RPG options. That is for sure true, especially in the case of Greedfall and many other games, but considering this is a new IP, this seemed to be their vision, and I think it worked really well. Siora is the other standout, who managed to have a performance connect you closer to characters in the island because of how well they conduct that she is just a genuine spirit and how much she cares about her people. So I really found her performance great too, because I feel like giving that convincing performance alongside the dialect that the natives have must have been really tough. So this is something I appreciated a little bit more. But anyway, across the board, Greedfall really delivered on everything I could have hoped for. I think my expectations were in check in a lot of ways, and there were some disappointments along the way, like the lacking of dialogue. Sometimes the quest just taking you for a ride, you're sort of just sitting there listening to your character do all the talking for you. There's some bugs, there's some hitches, there's some jank here, but what there's also is something special. This is developer spiders at their best, and that comes from someone who really thrashed both Technomancer as well as Bound by Flame. If this is the content quality they plan on delivering from now on, I am fully on board with what they're doing, and I really hope with their next game that they do get a bigger budget to do something even crazier, because they really have something cool here. The game does have multiple endings, there are multiple builds. It really is a great RPG, and it delivers on exactly what developer spiders wanted to. So this, for me, is a buy. I think that at the price of $40 to $50, you really can't go wrong. Yes, I'm even factoring in at this time of the year where it's busy. I really think Greedfall is worth a look if you give a dang about RPGs, because I had a great time with it, especially with a flurry of games coming in like The Surge, trying to beat Borderlands 3 for a review. There was a lot going on, and I still always went back to Greedfall, and I even went back after the fact when I had completed the game just to mess around with the universe. There's something really special about this game. It's something I could see myself going back to replay again, and I think you guys will really like what's here. So that'll do it for my review. I'd love to hear from all of you in the comments down below. What do you think of Greedfall? Are you interested in picking it up now? Fire away. Other than that, follow me on Twitter, follow me on Instagram. Those links are in the description down below, along with my Patreon. Do consider supporting that, as it fuels all the content I create here. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.